Today we're in 2 Kings, chapter 12, and it is 4 through 16, I think. Yes. So I'm going to give you a little background information. It says Elijah and Elijah focused their ministries on the northern kingdom of Israel, and thus involved the kings of Israel. This included Ahab. Now, forgive me of the mispronunciation of these names, but you know how that is. Ahazah, and these two were Elisha worked with. Joram, Jehoahaz, and Jehoash, and they were Elisha worked with. So a future president in the mysteries of both prophets was Jezebel. She was a scheming, idolatrous wife of King Ahab. And Jezebel was the daughter of a king of Sidon, and is a Baal worshiper. Jezebel had led the prophets of Baal in a showdown against Elijah at Mount Carmel, and additionally witchcraft and prostitution were associated with her. King Jehu eventually killed Jezebel and eliminated Baalism and its followers from Israel. Then the attention moves on to the northern kingdom of Israel, to the southern kingdom of Judea and of King Joash. When Judea's king Jehoshaphat died, his son Jehoram became king. Jehoram married Atilhalah, and he brought Baalism back to Judea. Upon Jehoram's death, his son Ahasuerus became king. And then Ahasuerus continued Baal worshipping in Judea. He ruled only 1 year before dying. So when he died, Ahasuerus' mother, Atilhalah, was determined to rule Israel. So she made sure that happened. So she pronounced the death sentence on all David's male descendants that were heir to the throne. So we know in previous history that she wasn't the only one that announced sentences of death on male children. We know that the Pharaoh did it when they thought that the Messiah was coming, and they wanted all the young boys killed. Well, that wasn't Pharaoh, that was King Herod. And Pharaoh did it when Moses was born, because he didn't want the children of the Hebrew with Moses. So we see in history that there's more than one that has killed all the young male children. But she didn't kill them all. There was one left. It was a 1-year-old named Jehoshaphat. And Jehoshaphat was hidden in safety by his aunt, Jehosheba, and she was married to a Hebrew priest. His name was Jehoiada. So they hid Joash along with his nurse in the Jerusalem temple. And there they stayed for 6 years until just before Atilah's disastrous reign was brought to an end. So in these formative years, Jehoash was taught by Jehoiada the priest. So Jehoash, and that's what we're going to be studying about today, is Jehoash, grew up on the throne. He was a boy king. His regent, Jehoiada, was a godly priest and a carefully guided Jehoash to become a God-minded man. So a good king he was. It was Jehoiada's influence that got Jehoash to repair the temple. So Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. Can you imagine having a president at 7 years old? But no comment now. So, with the power that he had at 7 years old to reign as a king. So, and he reigned for 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Ziba of Bathsheba. And Joash did that what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days that Jehoiada the priest lived. So once the priest passed away, Jehoash's sight was not on God any longer. His sights were on the world. So, you know, when you take your eyes off of God, what happens? All the sin starts coming back into your life. All the sin starts coming back into where you're working. You know, things change in your community, in your life, in your family. So right now, Joash was focusing on God. He was there living for God. Since the developing character of Joash was unmistakably the influence of his teacher and guardian. Now, how many of you all have had a good mentor in your life that has helped you along your path, showed you, you know, the way of the Lord? You know, we've got this program in Awana is going that each of our children has a mentor. And trying to help these children in their lives and just be there for them. And sometimes people need a mentor, even in work. You need someone to show you the ropes in your work. You need a mentor. You need somebody guiding you, telling you how things are going. Well, Joash needed a mentor, and that mentor was Jehoiada. So, like I said, Joash was only 7 when he started to reign. So Jehoiada chose wives for Joash. Men, how would you like to have your wives chosen for you? Say, I'm going to have you for him and you for him. Didn't matter who they were. So he picked up 2 women. Now, remember, Joab was a priest, and he had high expectations for Joash. So he didn't only just pick just a common girl or a girl that maybe was a Baal follower or a girl that was an idol worshiper. He wanted somebody for Joash that would continually on the godly path. So he was looking for the right person for Joash. He wasn't just saying, well, we need somebody to tie this country together. He was looking for godly wives. So they had to pass the test for Jehoiada. So in subsequence to this training, Joash got the idea of repairing the crumbling temple of Jehoiada's God. So we're going to be talking about the temple. So when you go about your day, are you a list maker? When you work, are you a list maker? Do you make a list of what all you need to do for the day? Or a project that's coming up, do you make a list of, I got to do this, and I got to do that, and I got to do this, and I got to do that? Some people say, just ride by the seat of their pants and say, oh, I've got this, you know, I can get it done without a list. And those people drive me nuts. Because I'm just thinking, you know, I am not a last minute person. I like to plan. I like to make sure that this is done this, and this is done this. And I like to make sure things get done on time. And these people that ride by the seat of their pants get it done on time, but it drives me nuts. I like to make sure that we have a schedule. I like to prioritize things. I like to make sure that somebody's in charge of something and that they're going to get it done. I know when I was a supervisor at Carrier, you know, part of my job was to make sure that the work got done. And, you know, I had to make sure that the people under me was there getting their job done and getting it done right. Now, if you didn't pay attention to what was going on, what do you think would happen? Would the work get done? It might get done, but not the time frame that you're thinking it should get done, or the time frame that was allotted. You know, when people are not accountable, you know, they say, oh, I'll get it done when, you know, in my time. You know, you have to make sure people know, well, you have to have it done by here. And you have to make sure that there's steps along the way that they're going to get it done by that time. So you have to be organized. You have to prioritize. You have to make sure that, you know, your jobs are getting done. So in our first verses, it is, like I said, 2 Kings chapter 12, and these are verses 4 and 5. It says, then Joash said to the priest, all the dedicated silver brought to the Lord's temple, censer silver, silver from vows, and all silver voluntarily given for the Lord's temple. Each priest is to take it from his assessor and repair whatever damage is found in the temple. So the first recorded action of Joash took to demonstrate his faithfulness to God was to speak to the priest about repairing God's house. The kings prioritized repairs. He prepared the temple so everyone could worship at a place that truly honored God. And how many times have we had building projects and you have gone because a portion of your building needed repair? We just went through one. Our sanctuary needed repaired. It needed updated. Joash was looking at the temple. The temple needed repair. The temple was in a sad shape. So the priests would oversee the project. They would not necessarily do the physical labor, but would supervise those who did. The king explained the funding of the temple repairs would come from the money that came from certain sources. The priests were used to use the dedicated silver. They were used censer silver and silver from vows, and even voluntary silver. So Joash saw that the temple, like I said, needed repair. The temple at this time was like 125 to 150 years old. So we know at the time that Solomon built the temple, what a grand temple it was. And all the gold, all the silver, all the servingware there, all the cedar that was inside the temple, we know what a fantastic place it was. But over the 125 years, with all the evil kings around, what do you think the temple may have looked like in 125 years? When you're not focused on God, you're focused on idol worshiping, you're focused on other things, you don't care what your building looks like. It doesn't have anything at all to do with you anymore, right? It can crumble to the ground because that's not where you go to worship. You go to the high places where the Baal offering is. You go to other places of worship. You may not even worship at all, so you could care less about what your temple looks like anymore. And there may not have been anything left in the temple after all the hard kings that were around. So some of the leaders had taken care of the temple. Not all of them were evil kings. There were some kings that worshiped God and wanted to take care of the temple. But the sons of Ateliad had stolen the sacred instruments and used them in the temple that honored Baal. Though they may not have been the only ones that had taken stuff out of the temple. So, if you look back over the years, you can see how the temple may have degraded. And if nobody does repairs to a building, you can see what happens to a building. So Joash instructed the priest to take all the dedicated silver and redirect the funds. These funds had previously gone to the priest for food and other personal needs. So the dedicated silver came from three sources. Like I said, it was the censer silver. Now the censer silver, this was a half shekel that each man 20 years and above was to bring annually to the temple. Now it originally was a one-time contribution, but developed into an annual tax after Solomon completed the temple. Well, when you have a temple, it has to be funded, right? It has to be maintained. So a tax was put on when Solomon completed it. And so the once-time contribution came into an annual tax that these people had to pay. So the second was the silver from vows. Now, people make vows, and they promise God, if you do this, I promise that I will give so-and-so to the church. So God didn't say that you had to do vows, but he said if you did do vows, keep them. Make sure that the vow you made, it's a promise, that you keep that promise. So any vow offering of silver was to go into the repair of the temple. So the third was silver voluntarily given to God. You know, we give free will offerings. We give extra on our tithes. You know, any extra, any free will offering that came through, this was going to the repair. Now, originally, this offering was an animal presented for sacrifice, but it transitioned into an offering of silver. So Joash also had the priests and the Levites go out into the cities of Judea and gather all Israel's money to repair the house of God. So there were several ways that money was coming in to repair the house. And the king instructed the priests to take it from the assessors. Now, you're thinking, what is an assessor? So an assessor's job was to determine the value of the silver. He would weigh the silver, and he would look at the quality of the silver and determine the value. So that was his job. So the king determined that the silver given to the temple, either as dedicated silver or as silver voluntarily given, should adequately fund the needed repairs. He even instructed the Levites to go to the Judea cities and invite contributions. So there was a lot of ways to get the silver. Now, this seems easy enough, right? The king had a plan. He said, we're going to use this silver, so let's get it done. You think it got done? You know, if you don't have an organized plan, does things get done? If you don't appoint the right people, do things get done? Well, we're going to see if it got done. So an old saying says, many people don't plan to fail, they just fail to plan. Some may fail to consider how long it will take to complete a project. Others are busy doing many things, but do not prioritize the most important projects. We may be overwhelmed with the enormity of the task, so we put it off hoping that it will take care of itself. Now, how many have done that? Say, it's not going to do it, it'll take care of itself, it doesn't really need it done, right? We do that with house cleaning. Oh, it's okay for this week. Nobody's going to be here, nobody's going to see it, right? And then what chore is it next week because we didn't do it this week? So we put off tasks because we don't think it needs to be done right away. So eventually, we reveal our priorities and the tasks we complete. What we think is important, we want to get done. If we think it's important, we want it done. But what's important to me is maybe not important to you. What's important to you may not be important to me. So if you don't have the right people and the right job, things may not get done. So the verses 6 and 8 says, by the 23rd year of the reign of King Joash, the priests had not repaired the damage to the temple. So they didn't do it, did they? So we don't know how many years have passed since the king said, I want it done, to the 23rd reign. But anyway, he had not done it. So King Joash called the priest Jehoiada and the other priests and asked, why haven't you repaired the temple's damage? Since you haven't, don't take any silver from your assessors. Instead, hand it over for the repair of the temple. So the priests agreed that they would receive no silver from the people and would not be the ones to repair the temple's damage. So like I said, this was in the 23rd year of the reign of Joash. And this was in 1813 BC. So in 2 Chronicles 24:1 records that, like I said, Joash was 7 years old and he reigned for 40 years. So this was about halfway in between his reign of king. And the text does not tell us what year Joash, began the temple. So, but Joash became impatient because the priests had not repaired the damage to the temple. So you can mark this down. Whether you may get a plan for your resources other than God's plan, the question of leadership in your life has not been settled. The Levites did not act at once. What could possibly be the reason the Levites were negligent and responded to the king's decree? Now remember, they were taking the Levites' money and what they designated to the temple. Now some of the money went to things of the temple, but the Levites had some of the money also. Do you want to give up your money? Well, the Levites were comfortable too, maybe, the way things were going. Why should they go out and put their hard work in, gathering all this money, getting everything done to repair the temple? Hey, it's okay. Those pink cushions were okay on this. We've had them for 30 years. They can last another 30 years, right? I don't see anything wrong. That hole over there, we just walk around it. When you get comfortable, in activity they grow, you grow comfortable in your possessions. There have been no call for sacrifice, no call for contentment, no accountability, and so they simply became comfortable with doing business as usual. How many of you have a favorite chair that is all tore up? You don't want to get rid of it, because this is my most comfortable chair. I fall asleep in it every night. We get comfortable in things that somebody else comes in and says, why haven't you thrown that thing out yet? So when you get comfortable, you say, oh, it's okay. Then they may have been complacent. Complacency is easily defined among God's people where there is a call of commitment. You immediately see those who, like the Levites, are basically indifferent to what God is doing among the people. When we get complacent, we don't want things to change. Well, we're fine with the way those are. Then why do we have to change what's going on? I don't like change. I like things going like they are. Why do we need to improve that? Why do we need to make another building? Hey, this roof isn't leaking yet. It's okay. We get complacent. We don't like change. We don't want things to change around us. When you have change, especially at work, sometimes you have to learn different things. And you're thinking, I don't want to learn anything else. I am fine with the way it's going right now. Why do we have to change what we're doing? Sometimes change is just a change of how you dress. Hey, I've been wearing these same clothes for 30 years. They look fine to me. We get complacent. We don't like to change. We don't like to move our Sunday school readers, do we? Hey, I like where I am. I've been here all this time ever since I've attended this class. Why do we change? We don't like to change the hour of our worship service. Hey, I have been at this worship service at 7 o'clock on a Sunday night for years. We don't like change. We don't want to change. We get complacent in what we do. So maybe the Levites were complacent. They didn't want to change. Maybe they were controlled by something other than the king. Maybe they were controlled by what was going on in their life. Maybe they didn't want to listen to the king. They wanted to control the things around. And the things around were going real good for them. They didn't see why I have to have any of this happening in the temple when things are going fine. I can control what's going on. I don't need the king to tell me what's going on. So when things change in your life, somebody wants something done, and you saying, well, the priest, you're going to take care of it. But then nobody is accountable, really. Nobody makes sure that it gets done. Then all of a sudden the king notices, hey, things aren't happening. So it seems likely they had failed to prioritize this important project. Perhaps their usual duties occupied much more of their time, and they decided everything was okay as it was. However, since the king was allotting financial resources toward the project, he wanted to ensure the money was going where it needed to go. In any case, the priests had failed to complete the repairs, and the Lord's house continued to display noticeable damage. So King Joash called the priest, his own mentor, Jehoiada, and the other priests. And Jehoiada had saved the king's life, and he mentored him So how would you feel when somebody that you mentor, somebody you work with, is going to call you on the carpet? We don't like to be called on the carpet anyway, do we? We don't like to be told that we have not done what we were supposed to do. Well, it must have pained the king to have to admonish his spiritual advisor. Jehoash's priority was to repair the temple for the likely visible damage. Joash asked the priest, "Why haven't you done this?" We can always make 1,000 excuses why we don't do something, can't we? We are ready to tell you why I didn't get it done. It's never me, though, that didn't get it done, right? It's always somebody else's fault we didn't get it done. Well, they had me doing this, or they said it wasn't necessary to do this. It was never our fault, right? We can make excuses why it's not my fault. So they were more than anyone else should have been concerned over the temple's conditions. And why is that? They worked there every day. They were the ones that were supposed to take care of the temple in the first place, right? The priest's job was to maintain the temple. So why wouldn't they want the repairs to go on? Why wouldn't they think it was a great idea to update their temple, to make the repairs? So Joash therefore instructed the priests, "Don't take any silver from your assessors." He was relieving them of their duties to oversee the work. Now Joash gave the priests a great opportunity. He had given them the opportunity to make a beautiful temple again. He instructed them instead, hand the money over for the repairs. The king would assign the task to faithful workers who would ensure the task was completed. And so the priests agreed to Joash's proposal. They likely had any choice in the matter. So they agreed they would receive no silver from the people any longer and would not be the ones to repair the temple. So the long-standing plan, what King Joash's first desire, however, what desire is rarely what we get. The king saw the work was not being done, so he raised the level of awareness and assessment. So he didn't give up. While we are unsure to the exact time of the young king's determined to repair the house of God, we do know that it was his 23rd year that he decided it's not getting done. He had a plan. He had been the one to notice the conditions of the temple and intended something to get done about it. Obviously, his mentor Jehoiada, along with the other priests, had grown accustomed to the sad shape of the temple and wanted to keep putting it off. Probably this time wasn't right. The money wasn't good. And there's other 1,000 excuses why they didn't want to do it. So Jehoash came up with a solution. He came up with another plan. So in verses 9 it says, "Then the priest Jehoiada took a chest, bored a hole in its lid, and set it beside the altar on the right side as one enters the Lord's temple. The priest who guarded the threshold put into the chest all the silver that was brought into the Lord's temple." So Joash, working with Jehoiada again, developed a new plan. His intent was to restore both the temple and the proper worship of God to its rightful place. The king's heavy involvement in the temple was uncommon. The last time the temple was mentioned occurred 5 kings back when Asa raised the temple treasury of its gold and silver in order to pay a bribe to Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram. So 2 words describe Joshua's new plan. And the first was accountability. If you remember when the king told the priests, let's, collect the silver, let's get it done. He did not assign any anyone accountable. He just said, we're going to get this done. So if you don't put somebody in charge, things doesn't get done. He thought he put the priest in charge. He didn't say, you are the man getting this done. So when you don't have accountability, things do not get done. So rather than having several priests going to collect the silver, Joash commanded that a chest among a single wooden box be built to receive and hold the silver offerings from the people. So after Jehoiada bored a hole in the lid of the chest, it was placed at the north gate at the temple's inner court. And this was funneled all the silver into the single location. It went directly from the people to the temple. The priests who guarded the threshold referred to 3 priests who were responsible for making sure no one unclean entered the temple. So they were given the responsibility of placing the dedicated silver into the chest and did so in front of all the people. So here's where some of your accountability comes into. Now you have 3 people that's in charge of making sure when people come and want to deposit silver, the silver gets deposited. Before, no one did. No one took charge. Now we have 3 people here making sure that the silver was deposited in the chest. Even though they were multiple priests, this new process helped ensure that the entire offering went to a single chest at the temple. So over the years, churches sometimes initiate special projects, such as us. Members have been challenged to support projects with designated gifts beyond their usual contributions. And we do that all the time. You know, we raise money all the time for something our church needs. Since doing so gives everyone an opportunity to participate in the advance of God's work. Every contribution is important, whether large or small. Worshippers in Joash's day, who brought the designated offering to the temple, no doubt shared the same sense of responsibility. How do you all feel when we have a special project going on and we're asked to collect money and you give your offering? To me, it puts a special place in my heart knowing that I am helping toward the designated thing that we're doing, that I'm glad to be a part of it. Sometimes even though I'm thinking, well, I don't really care if we do that or not, I'm still a part of that offering because I'm a member of this church. And if our church has voted on doing it, I'm a part of the church. And I am still going to be a part of the offering. And we should give freely. We should give gladly. We should give joyfully. And these people at this time, they were giving joyfully because they were going to see what the money that they were giving to was going to happen. Their temple was going to be repaired, and they were giving joyfully for that. All funds received went to the restoration of the temple. The people, now free to give offering to the work, they no longer were forced to pay a tax, with no say in where and how the funds were spent. They knew all that was given will go to the repairs of the temple. So, the first time that I can remember us doing a project when I was here was when we did Celebration 60. And I know several of you all were here during our Celebration 60. We had a goal we set. We had a goal in money that we needed to make. And we had a goal of the repairs that we needed to do. If it wasn't for accountability, if it wasn't for somebody prioritizing this, things would not get done. And that's the way in this temple. Somebody didn't take on ownership. If you don't take on ownership in projects, things doesn't get done. So you have to have somebody that is organized, somebody in charge. That's my favorite saying. I always say, well, somebody has to do it. My friends can vouch for me. I say that all the time. Because if you don't have somebody in charge, it's not going to get done. So you have to prioritize. You have to have accountability. So in the second plan of King George, he had accountability. So in verses 10 to 12, it says, wherever they saw there was a large amount of silver in the chest, the king's secretary and the high priest would go back up and talent of silver found in the Lord's temple. Then they would give the weight of silver to those doing the work. Those who oversaw the Lord's temple, they in turn would pay out of those working on the Lord's temple, the carpenters, the builders, the masons, the stonecutters, and would use it to buy timber, and quarry stone to repair the damage to the Lord's temple, and for all the expenses for the temple repair. So once they gathered the funds, Jehoiada and the king's secretary would give the weight of silver to all of those doing the work. So now we have somebody in charge of the silver giving out the appropriate funds. Before, nobody was really in charge. Nobody was collecting. Nobody was doing anything. So the priests had failed to oversee the work. So now the money would go directly to those who oversaw the Lord's temple. Those were in charge of making the repairs. So it would pay out to those working on the Lord's temple. So the text mentions 4 specific groups of workers. They were the carpenters, they were the builders, the masons, and the stonecutters. These supervisors also used the designated offerings to buy the timber and quarry stone for the repair of the damage of the Lord's temple. So they purchased the material the skilled craftsmen used to complete the work. All expenses for the temple repair also came from the fund. This expression probably refers to the many incidental costs that are among the work on the significant project. So now we have at least 4 people that the money is going directly to make sure that the repairs on the temple is getting done. And they are paying the costs. They are paying the people working. So we have people accountable to getting it done. So when the chest was full of silver, we know 2 people were responsible for counting it. So the king's secretary and the high priest. Both men had to be held in high regard to maintain these rows. And we have people today in our church that we hold in high regard, collecting our offerings, counting our offerings, make sure it goes to the bank, make sure our funds are divvied out correctly, making sure that when a project is happening, the funds are going correctly where they should be. We have accountability in our own church. And if you don't have accountability, you fail. So they would give to the silver to those doing the work. So these two men, the secretary and the priest, gave the money forward. They made sure the right money was given at the right time to the right people. Because the people gave in abundance, the chest had to be emptied daily. The people's generosity was an indication of 2 things. First, the temple, its upkeep, and the proper worship of God had become high priorities for the Israelites. And second, Joash's solution had worked. So when you have accountability, when you have people in charge doing the work correctly, it gets done. So in our last verses, in 13, 14, and 15 and 16, it says, however, no silver bowls, wood trims, sprinkling basins, trumpets, or any articles of gold or silver were made for the Lord's temple from the contributions bought from the Lord's temple. Instead, it was given to those doing the work, and they repaired the Lord's temple with it. No accounting was required from the men who received the silver to pay those doing the work, since they worked with integrity. The silver from the guilt offering and the sin offering was not brought to the Lord's temple, since it belongs to the priest. So the king, no doubt, wanted to be sure the people who gave the money for the temple's repair would see the results of their investment. How did you feel the first day you walked in here and you saw the sanctuary after the renovation? I was excited to come in and see what all was done. The people here that was given their money to repair the temple, when they could see what was being done, you can imagine how they felt also. They were joyful. They were excited about the repairs of their temple. But you notice that the repairs did not include the silver bowls, the wood trimmers, the sprinkling basins, trumpets, or any articles of the silver. So that normally would serve as an ongoing worship at the temple. But these were financed by other temple funds. They were funded by the temple treasury, not the designated offering. So only when the contribution to the repair of the damage exceeded the need did the remaining funds go to the temple items. So they said the church was overflowing daily. So we know that they had more money coming in to repair the temple that was needed. So they allocated those funds for the instruments if they needed to go elsewhere. Maybe instruments to worship. Maybe instruments to fund other things going on in the temple. So as it stated, the representative of both the palace and the temple monitored and recorded the total amount of the money that came in and was dispersed. No accounting was required from the men who received the silver to pay what the work was going on. And why is that? Because they knew that they had men of integrity that would do the right thing, men that would pay for the cost of the material to rebuild, the men who paid for their workers. They were accountable. They knew where the money was going and how much was spent. Men of integrity. At least 2 officials and 1 palace from the temple knew how much money went into this project. Those that supervised, they worked with integrity. The text also noticed that the silver from the guilt offering and the sin offering was not brought to the Lord's temple. The book of Leviticus provides detailed instructions related to both the sin offering and the guilt offering. With each sacrifice, a portion was burnt on the altar, and the rest belonged to the priest. So these 2 offerings were not touched. They were kept for the priest because they were divvied for the priests anyway. This was God's way of providing for the priests and their families. So the text makes it plain that Joash and Ben-Hadad's work to oversee the repair of the temple damage did not result in disregarding stipulations from the law of Moses. The priests kept the portions of the offering to which they were entitled, and the temple repair work was funded through the designated offerings of the people. So Joash's new system offered 2 advantages to the earlier one. First, it streamlined the process. Second, there was accountability of every step. And people presented their offerings in full view of everyone. Multiple priests were assigned the task of placing the offerings in the chest. 2 men of impeccable reputation served as conduits who received the money and oversaw it. The overseers had been hired for the work, were also men of flawless character. These 2 advantages would have enabled outsiders to see the integrity of those involved in leading and doing the restoration of the work. This above-reproach system ultimately reflected positively on the reputation of the Lord, whose temple was being repaired. So God wanted the temple repaired. And so he put it on King Joash's heart to repair the temple. It was obviously recognizable to anyone who visited there that there was great need. It was only a matter of responding to the recognition that there was before every time they made their way to the temple. Recognition of spiritual needs and needs related to the building of the spiritual life is difficult to acknowledge and to admit. The reason is obvious. It takes financial support and personal commitment. And anything we do in our church, it takes support and it takes commitment. If we don't have the support and we don't have the commitment, we fail. So when the priests were too reluctant to get it done, Joash set up the collection chest and presented the need to people. And the people recognized the need to respond and sacrificially gave. And we all sacrificially give. We sacrificially give our tithes every week. But when we have projects going on, we sacrificially give more. And our church is very blessed because we have a very giving church. Like I've said before, no matter how many times we've asked for money, it always comes in and more abundantly because we have a sacrificially church who loves the Lord. The people gave and the temple work was complete. King Joash knew this. It cost to do ministry God's way. They invested in the eternal, they gave, and it was good. The temple of God was restored. The witness of the temple was once again a priority in the lives of God's people. So when we have accountability, when we prioritize, when we have organization, things get done in the church. When you have the love of God in your church, things get done. When you have the love of God in your heart, things get done. So we're thankful that God oversees. We're thankful that God chooses respectable people, people of reproach, people that He can count on to oversee things in your church. We're thankful for a loving church that gives sacrificially. So let us go ahead and have our prayer. Our Heavenly Father, thank you so much, Lord, for our church, for the members of our church, Lord, because the members are your church. And I am so blessed, Lord, to be a part of your church. And I'm thankful, Lord, for these members. Because as I said before, they give sacrificially, Lord. When you ask, things are done. And I'm thankful for each one of them, Lord. Thank you for always being with us. Thank you for your guidance. Thank you for the love you give us, Lord. Thank you for being a part of our church. In your name we pray. Amen.